So let's take a moment to make our first solenoid of the new year. So I'm going to press X and delete that, and we'll bring in a cube. And the quickest way to delete half of a plane is to just use bisect with mirror, and we'll just bisect, split that in half. Tap in edit mode, and we're just going to control click mark in order to bevel this point, and we'll just roll it in. And from here we can just go under profile, choose custom, and begin just playing with our profile here. So the first thing I always do whenever I'm messing with profiles is I will set 2 points and set them both to vector, so that way everything that I do inside is also vector. And from here we can just click points and just begin adding things in. Of course, dealing with this graph can be a little bit tricky at times, but I've spent a bit of time in it, so practice makes perfect. And then we'll just keep dragging points, working on straight lines. Of course, I could be OCD and just be copying values and pasting them in order to make sure everything's absolutely precise on the Y. In fact, I might just do that. I'll just press Control C, hovering over that, Control V, Control V, Control V, Control C, Control V, Control V, Control V, just for a little absolute control there. And we can just add a few more points in this to make it completely accurate to the shape that we're drawing. And I just like to put in little angles and make them straight and vector, and try to keep the original angles. Usually gives me a pretty cool look. And I always also like to find the most minimal amount of points required to get the look that I'm going for, so that way no points are wasted with this. Sometimes that can be tricky as well, but believe me, even though this is a lot of work, it all pays off. And then of course we can press Alt W, switch over to Hops tool, and just bring in this shape and just play with it if we want to. In fact, I am going to add a few more points here on the end just to kind of give it a flat top. We'll first vector it, put it at the end, make sure that one's a vector as well, and there we go. Of course, for that we'll need to just add a few more points in here, but now we have a little bit more sane shape, at least to me, for what we're about to be doing. So when it comes to profiles and hops, we do have the ability to save it. So if you're using like the hops helper, you can of course deal with your profile here just like you would in the helper, but you also have the ability to save your profile. So I'm going to save my profile. However, it doesn't appear that it was going to save it in the right place, so let's see. I have a folder already called profiles, and this is profile number 36. I'm going to make sure to copy that folder and save it, so when I press Control K, we can look at our paths and just make sure that our profiles are set to the right profiles, for example. And we don't even have our light set to the right light profiles either, so let's just set that to light rigs. And with Control K, we can also save our preferences, so we don't have to deal with that again. And we have saved our profile, so that means, best of all, that alright, looks like I got an error with my folder. Let's press Control K and just see what I did there. And that's correct. Alright. So here we are scrolling through our custom profiles. Just needed to double check my folder. Appears to be what my error was. And here I am scrolling through the profiles. However, I don't want to use those profiles. I want to use the profile that we just created. So we'll adjust the size of it. And from here we can choose to just screw it. If you see all blue whenever you choose screw, that means everything works out. However, if you were to rotate it and work from a different angle, like this one, let's just work from this angle for the purposes of this, and you were to perform a screw, you might get more unacceptable results like what we're seeing here. If everything's all red, you might need to press C to calculate, or even press F to flip. F to flip is also good. And here we are looking at our spun result. However, we want to shift click sharpen in order to get everything shaded just right by scrolling it in. And then we can Alt W, switch over to box cutter. Sorry, I don't know where my mind is today. And just begin making a few cuts. And you know, as always, I just always start off a little random, kind of working on things until I get things to make sense. When it comes to mirror, I like to press Alt X to bring it up, and then I press X to reset it, and then from there I can just mirror it on the Z. So sometimes if you use previous settings, they'll still be there. And so resetting it very quickly is important to us. So just know inside of mirror, you can just do that with X. And we will just continue working some cuts in. We see that it's working on our integrity of our shape itself, but that's fine. We can deal with that in our own way later on. I'm just going to bring out a box, press W, turn that into a wedge. And you'd think I would mirror it to the other side, but you know, I think I've been doing that for 365 days, so we will change that for this one and just keep it only on this side until the end when I finally break that. But here we are looking at our shape so far, and you know, we talked about ever scroll and how you can use it to scroll through your modifiers. Sometimes I like to use it to scroll to a state and then shift click to apply, and this will give me a duplicate of the object modified and applied to that particular state. And then from there I can just delete everything else. And let's just extend this and press EX, and we'll just bevel this area. And let's just select this object and select this one, and Alt-X, mirror it across this object using this one. And let's just take this chance to just use curve extract to turn this particular selection into a curve. One of my favorite things to do with these solenoid exercises, the whole purpose of them is to be a kind of modeling exercise to help you find Zen before you start getting to the rigmarole and frustration of actual working. Because, you know, once you start doing that, you're gonna begin wishing for the end of the day, because you know it always is long. Let's try that again. I accidentally hit the draw dot. So we'll start here and bring this in. We don't actually want a wedge. Gotta watch it with those hotkeys sometimes, looking at the screen. And we'll shift it to live, but we'll select this and control click on mark in order to perform a reverse bevel. And so with this reverse bevel, we can now go ahead and just click on radial array, except we want to control click it to radial array around the 3D cursor. And placing about 6 of these will do us right. And this is what we're looking at so far with our solenoid. I mean, don't really worry about the side. We can always deal with that however we want to. In fact, let me show you one way I would deal with that. I would just put a loop cut in here. And of course we see that it breaks everything, and that's because there's a vertex group here and we don't want to interfere with that. So if we press Ctrl G, it will remove it from the active group. We see that this is now clean, and we can just bring this out to kind of space out that shading a little bit. Of course, if we get in too far, it's going to start causing us some problems. In fact, it's causing us some problems already. So what we want to do is delete any geometry on the inside, which also breaks things. Visually, you probably can't tell it's broken, but I can tell. If we press Alt-V and use face orientation, we can see that things aren't calculated just right with our screw modifier. And so the easiest way to fix that is to go under screw, and we can just press C to calculate, and we can press F to flip. And now we're actually using this correctly, where it's calculating correctly and then flipping. And so if we want to fix this shading, we could also do that. Like, we want to take it a step further. One of my favorite things to do is start working on a solenoid at a resolution small, like 36, and then up it as time goes on near the end, especially once you start getting the bevel in here. But for now, let's continue cutting on this. And we're just trying to just have a little fun with our solenoid. And it appears that, you know, I was thinking that I should mirror this object across this object, and I didn't. And of course, here I am bringing back this object where I'll do the same thing, allowing it to just mirror across, giving me a more unified look to it. And let's just continue on with our solenoid. So I'm now going to draw one more cut here. We'll just take that area out, and let's just keep going with it. So just bringing out my cut, just working this area, and we'll press X to reverse this. Actually, we don't want to go that route where we're separating things out. Sometimes people wonder why I do separations and why I do solidifications instead. It's because solidifications allow the object to remain together, while slicing will make it into a different object, which will affect my ability to scroll it later, because, you know, scrolling multiple objects isn't a thing yet until it's a thing. But for now, you can only scroll a single object. So sometimes I'm like, you know what, for the scroll, I should do it. So I just brought the object back a little bit and then extruded it in order to just kind of bring up a little lip. And let's talk about bevel. So we're going to grab this edge and this edge, giving me a hard time there. Press Control B to bevel it. We'll press C to clamp it. And so always whenever you clamp and meet, there's going to be one extra edge you have to get rid of, or else problems will ensue. So now that we've done that, we can just select the object, go back with box, maybe even press W to begin just working on our wedge angle that we're cutting in to this particular solenoid. And you know, at the very beginning, we did a cut directly down the center. So let's select this, and we will change this to Shift and begin performing a cut down the center with circle, just to make it a little more interesting. We could have taken an easy way out and just let it be a hole, but you know, you should always take an opportunity to try to find some interesting gold within that circle by playing with the detail that's available. So we're going to take this chance to control click on radial array and press X a couple of times. And now we have, you know, something a little bit more step. And also this is a slice, so I just realized I made a big mistake again. So how can I go about this? I could delete the object, forget I ever did that, and we could just go and locate that particular cutter, which is still available even though we deleted its parent, and cut something like that if we want to just keep it scroll worthy. But really I feel there's something that needs to go inside of there, so I'll just draw a circle, but we'll press J and just bring it out just a little bit. And you can see how choky it gets with all these modifiers. Of course, it's beyond time to begin applying things, but we're going to continue on with this. So I'm bringing the shape back, got quite a few mods. However, you know, you've watched me build this thing up, you guys have an idea. So continuing on, if we wanted to just scroll this to, in fact, let's take this and select both of these and just union that together. And let's bring back this object through EverScroll, and we want to remove decimate and put a subdivision on it. So that way it joins to it quite nicely. So now all of this is one. If we shift scroll through EverScroll, we can actually see this object as it's built up. It started off like that, and then it got a custom profile, and then it began going through the rigmarole with all the booleans that we began stacking on. In fact, we only really added about 20 booleans here, and I'm assuming that we didn't do anything with exact. The easiest way to find out is to go in the boolean helper, where you can look and see if any of your booleans are using the exact algorithm, because sometimes that can cause issues with speed. But with that, we've now created our cylinoid. Like I said, at the end I always raise the amount of segments on my spin in order to increase the shading viability a little bit. So let's just jump it up to 48. We see that it looks a lot better. We jump this up to 64, it will look a lot better, but also it will also add a lot of geometry. So if we look at the wireframe, it's really not that bad considering the amount of detail that we cut in, but it's always nice to step these things up dynamically as you're working on them, especially when it comes to the apply process. You definitely shouldn't apply without giving some consideration to the mods that you're about to apply, and maybe even at the very least make a duplicate file and save a version of it before the big apply of 2020, just in case you 2020 your file. So, you know, me being me, I can't stop. I'm going to bring this in and shift to live, even though I'm really hitting my limits. And to reset the axis on this, the easiest way is to select both of them and just press Q, reset axis, and we could just press X, which didn't work. We'll press Y because we changed our axis at the very beginning, and we could just control click mark in order to continue adding this detail to the mesh. In fact, we see this not going to work out very well with our cylinder, so me personally, I like to actually try to force these things to work. So I'm looking for the very first boolean that we created, the originator of this, and we'll just put some loop cuts on it in order to quarantine this area, and we see that the shading just looks just a little bit better. So the next thing from here is actually promoting this to bevel, which means that we're probably going to need to deal with some of this stuff that we've done. Like we cut these little ticks in. The angle bevel is definitely going to catch that and is going to become some problematic situation. So let's see if we can identify that particular boolean. It's this one. We've now brought it back to reality using Hops tool and the dots. So we'll just adjust the bevel till it's something smaller. And we're just looking at what we have and thinking about where we can go next with this. In fact, I still feel that we could select this, press S, Shift, X to scale it on every axis but X to make it just a little bit smaller and get a really fine hole. And this leaves us this really big flatty area at the top. So let's talk about that. We can use shift click on Smart Apply to also get us a Smart Apply duplicate. However, this one's a duplicate at the final level. And we're just going to just select all this geo off of this duplicate. Keep in mind that this is a duplicate. So whenever I'm working in this state, I always work fast because I don't want to get tripped up and think that I'm working on the main object. And even though this inset failed, I'm going to force it to work. So sometimes that requires just sliding around a little bit of geometry because things will just overshoot. Blender be Blender. And so I spent a lot of time studying a lot of these failure points that come up, trying to understand what they are and how they happen and how we could go about conquering them and getting past them, and what it takes, and at least how we can let users be more aware that these sort of issues can happen. And if you're not aware of how Blender is, you probably come in thinking that this is a very feature complete, well done program, but Blender be Blender. Everything's always a summer of code away, from being its true form. So don't judge it too harshly. But one of the big limits you're definitely going to run into in Blender starting out is misusing subdivision. I see so many posts of people who just put subdivision where it ain't needed and wonder why their computers choke, or they're cutting with subdivision present and wondering why things choke. Those are some things that definitely have a performance hit, so it's worth giving them some consideration before implementing them into your scene, because sometimes the cost isn't a cost that you want to pay. Just like exact, sometimes you don't want the cost that comes with exact. So being aware that exact is going on so that you can either mitigate it or plan for it is always a smart idea. And by exact, I'm talking about the different Boolean systems. So we'll shift click and apply this to live, and we'll go under mesh tools and control click radial array to radiate this, pressing X to change which axis we're radiating this around. And we just want to roll the wheel enough that we get it just right. I mean, I'm trying to also make it correlate with the mirror a little bit. But if we look at this, this is now the result of us just mucking around and creating our final solenoid of the year. So to top it off, we want to put a bevel on top of it, because the bevel will be the toughest, and everyone struggles with that. So let's put a bevel on it. Let's press 1 in order to adjust our shading, and we see that we got to bring it in a little bit because there's a little bit of overlap just happening in front of my face. But really, it's not too bad. We have to shrink it according to all these areas where we were just too near with things. But that's just the cost that you have to pay when it comes to dealing with the bevel that's built in. Here's another area where there's just a little bit of artifacting. It's also happening here. Is it the worst thing? Is it worth us lowering it all the way down just to get around? I think the answer is probably not. So maybe there's something that could actually be done about that. Let's go through our ever scroll, and we'll roll the wheel until we find the boolean that actually started that calamity. And with luck, we'll just come across it. Actually, that problem is not caused by a boolean. That problem is caused by a bevel profile. So we're just going to play with our points, just get it to something a little more reasonable, and let's alt click sharpen and just fix the shading once and for all, so that way we can really step back and admire what we're looking at here. Also, where's this area? That's not it. There's one area that just isn't looking right, and it's this one. So if you add extra loops, they just get sent to random places that they're not needed. So what's the problem here is that we need to actually go under bevel and alt scroll in order to lower the angle to catch that area. But we don't want to catch the cylinder. As you can see, I was catching it just a little bit, and that's about as big as we are allowed with this particular iteration of the model. But there we are looking at our final solenoid of the year. So I'm going to go under power save, and we'll just call this solenoid. And power save, and we see that this is my 30-second solenoid power saved with power save, brought to you by power save. And let's just alt M, slap it with a blank material. Everything's looking good so far. And this is our shape. And of course, if we don't like the color, we can shift click material scroll to just scroll through endless iterations of materials until we find the one that we want. Maybe that one is a little bit more to my liking. So we save this one. I'm going to press Control Shift S, and we're going to put a _1 on this. So we save it with a _1 iteration. And you know, I just love selecting stuff and just pressing QOT. Pressing space, switching to plane because I'm still in V2. V2 is still the default. You have to opt in to use 1.5 at this time until everything is completely perfect with it. And there's still some things that I feel could be just a little bit better. We'll press Alt VB, or actually Alt VV, and just find a good environment for us to look at for this. Maybe something like that, a little dark overcast, and then we can press Alt VB and just roll in some lights and just roll through lighting setups until we just find a randomized setup that will suit us for the purposes of just showcasing our little solenoid. So something like that will do. However, I might want to shift scroll through the floor to just find something that's either way shinier or less shiny. I mean, that milky one right there also looks pretty crazy. We get in and look at our solenoid, and this is our final result. I mean, this was just 20 minutes of just us just kind of BSing, and not only were we able to cut all these interesting, very troublesome cuts into it, we're able to also end it with the bevel without even having to talk about weld. And we can still go in and do the same little inset trick that we did on the outside with this area. And you know, it's the end of the year, so let's save the file and let's do that. We can't do it with this object because there's all these modifiers live. So let's just shift click Smart Apply, and we'll just deal with our duplicate. And I'm just holding Control and clicking from face to face to just get everything in between. And this is just a really nice way to move around whenever you're dealing with in-gone meshes. So I'm just insetting, Control I, deleting everything that wasn't what we were just looking at, realizing that we need a lot more inset going on. So maybe something like that. And let's remove it again, and let's go on local mode. And you probably could have realized that, you know, I could have just stopped while I was ahead and let that be, but instead we want to learn from this and turn this into a learning experience about how you can get in and deal with these sort of failures when they happen, because you know, it's not a problem of if, it's just a problem of when. I mean, not even a problem, a question. It's a question of when, because everyone's going to run into issues. Everyone's going to run into performance hangs, or things not working optimally, or a button not being what it's supposed to be compared to what you thought it was going to be, and all these sort of things. But just know that, you know, we're there for you. And I'm always at the wheel, doing everything in my power to make sure that these tools are at their best shape, even for an event like New Year's. So here we are, just dissolving points, just cleaning things up. When it comes to dissolving, it's an easy answer, just the useless ones. You know, some of these stick out so far, the only way they can go is out of this galaxy through the power of Control X, one of my favorite hotkeys in Blender. We can just dissolve points, and we see that the adjacent edges are also removed. I mean, we don't have to go so far. I'm being a little OCD with this, but let's press Q, solidify, press 2, and we can now come back here, select the main shape, perform a difference, and did that work out for us? It appears so. I saw an area up here that didn't look very good. I don't know if I'm really digging what is going on here. Let's just bring it out, try to even it a bit. And with this area, we also see that we've hit some limits of our bools just being too close together. And just using a little bit of ever scroll to recall the right cutter at the right time, at just the right moment, we can move that and just give this geometry a little bit more flexibility. So let's talk about this area. We could either shrink our bevel to get it to work, or we can do the dance of messing with bowl shapes to get it to work. But for this one, I'm going to try a different trick. We're going to bring in weld, and I'm going to roll into weld, and then shift roll the weld up one, and we'll click to apply. And we see that weld was able to help us a little bit with getting a little bit more flexibility out of our geometry here. And so if we look at our stack, we see that this stack has gotten quite immense with us putting the right modifier at just the right time for us to be able to continue working. And that's really, you know, what HardOps is all about. So to really wrap this thing up, what I will do is, well, firstly, the reason that we did all this is so we can do a scroll. So I'm just going to draw a box around this and just shift click on ever scroll, and we can just roll this through until we get to the conclusion. And this is something I love doing. You know, anytime I'm working, I always do a scroll just to show the process that I took in order to get to a final result. And so now we can really just take this thing to task, because it's all just one color. It's so boring. So we're going to need to slice it up. We're going to need to, and also we're on the _2 of this file, meaning that we can probably do whatever we want at this point. But I'm being very delicate with these cuts because I don't want to introduce any problems at this point. We've already fought our bevel to the point of it being, you know, pretty nice. Also, it'll be a lot easier if we put a mirror on this. So let's shift A, and we'll just place a empty of a sphere, and let's just place it here, and we'll just select all our components and the empty, alt X, and just mirror that across. So we just have a double-ended solenoid. It's just easier than figuring out the other side, even though we could go ham on the other side as well. But I don't think Blender's going to take it. We're already pushing our luck. I know that there's some strangeness happening with 2.92 as it is, and I'm just committed to always doing our demos in the latest version of Blender for some reason at this time. So we'll just cut another piece out. We see that that piece also gave us a little bit of a hang, because, you know, we're at the end game now. Let's perform a cut from the top, except we want to use view, and let's also turn on pause mode because we want our performance back. So we'll just perform our cut. No shame in using pause mode. It just means that, you know, you've hit the limit of your computer. Everyone has limits. It just happens. We'll just dissolve that edge and just turn this into a wedge. And let's just bring this to the other side. And then we can Alt X mirror it to the other side. Except I want a little bit of a gap in between. Thought that looked cool. Keep in mind, that rotation I did at the beginning to change which axis I'm working on, that one choice continues to haunt me to this moment. Making this demo just a little bit harder than usual, but I'm just so used to being X-centered that you remove that from me, and puts me in a world of hurt. So I'm going to draw another box, and because we're still in pause mode, I can just press space bar and it will just calculate everything after the operation. Of course, sometimes that may take a second, but we're at that point in the solenoid that we are pretty brutal on the computer. So continuing on, might also want to slice the front of this off. So let's do that. Take this moment. You know, one of the things that I'm told often internally is that, you know, for every slice you do, you are basically duplicating the work that's being done by the computer and the amount of modifiers it's having to keep up with and create derived meshes of. So just something to keep in mind. If things begin getting slow and you're dealing with slices, we would have gotten a lot further if we would have sliced things at the beginning, but instead we're slicing things at the very end game. So, you know, what could go inside the solenoid is an icosphere. You know, don't judge me. And we'll just alt click it. And where's our empty? not that empty. We want that, and we want that, and that, and then Alt-X to mirror that to the other side. And we go back to our render, and this is what we're looking at so far with our result. Something like that. And, you know, let's have a little more fun with things. So, you know, we want even more glowy lights in our solenoid, you know. So RX90, RZ90, just gonna be giving me the business all day. And we'll just place a curve here and give it the same emissive material. In fact, we can even control click and mirror across the same empty. So that way we have this happening on both sides. And this video is already approaching 30-minute mark, so that is my cue to definitely wrap things up. So we'll get our view aligned just the way we want it, and we can just press Q, add camera with nothing selected, and get our camera placed just right. Maybe scale the empty to scale the camera. And so the next thing is, of course, depth of field. With depth of field, we can just click on the camera to select the camera. And I'm going to enable depth of field, and we'll set our target to be this Bezier circle. And as we lower it, we can see the depth of field coming in. We don't want too much that takes focus, but just enough will do the job. I'll jump back into viewport adjust and press Q in order to make bloom come on, because we have 10 different ways to enable bloom. But if you want to do it the long way, you can always go to the helper, and under the render panel, there's an option for you to turn bloom off and on and adjust the settings. So now we are looking at the complete solenoid. We can press Alt-VB if we want to just scroll through different light setups, depending on how we want to, of course, present this thing. But solenoids are always just a fun way to get used to HardOps and having fun with the Blender boolean workflow. But we'll just right click, go back to current. And if I begin playing, it's going to begin playing just too fast. We want something a little more chill. We want to click on frame range, which will set us to 6,000 frames, unless you press F9 and you choose how many frames you want it to be. So now, if we let this play, this is the result of our work here with creating the solenoid. But that's not how you play your animation when it comes to hops. We'll go to the hops button, and under about, where it's telling us we need to update, we're going to control click on the about button, and this will bring up the Pong credits. And from here, we can then play Pong. And then if we want, we can even press A, and the animation will just keep playing in the background, and we can just continue on defeating the enemies in red who seek to overtake us. But with that, we can wrap up this video. Thank you all for watching. Happy New Year, and I'll see you guys next time.